2004. My name is Jane Gelman, and this is a project of the Jewish Historical Society. What's your full name?
Leo Kissel.
Was Kissel the family name when?
Yeah, it had varied spellings. Kichel, Kitchel, Kitchel, Kissel with a U and an umlaut. I found two graves down at Spring Hill Cemetery. K-U, the umlaut over it, S-S-E-L. And what probably happened was in the 1840s, there was so much anti-Semitism in Germany. Some came to the United States, some went to Lithuania like my father's family, and some went to South Africa. So then when my father came over from Lithuania with his nephew, Morris Eugen, 1908, they came to Milwaukee.
Do you know why? Why Milwaukee?
Well, Morris Eugen settled here, and we settled in Chicago. My father settled in Chicago and married in Chicago and had a family. And one time Morris came down to Chicago to visit, and he saw my father had a store. He was a tailor and a furrier. And in addition, he was working in a cleaning and dyeing plant, moonlighting, to make a living. These were tough times. So Morris said, "Jake, what are you killing yourself for? I'll find a store for you in Milwaukee, and you won't have to kill yourself." So he did. Morris had a store on 5th and National. He found a store for my father on 25th and Hopkins, near where the Ava Smith plant was. And so my father and I came here, and my mother and brother stayed in Chicago for a while, and then came up here, and it's been wonderful.
So how old were you when you came to Milwaukee?
14.
Okay. And so you came to work in the store?
I didn't work in
Oh,
the
you didn't
store.
work,
No, I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
But we were getting out of Chicago because they found this place, and life would be better in Milwaukee, and it was.
Wow. What kind of store was it?
He was a cleaner and dyer and a furrier, so.
So the Eugen furs?
Not Eugen, Kissel furs.
Okay, Kissel furs. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So when did your mother and your
Well,
brother
then they
come?
came a few months
Oh,
later.
just a little while.
That's all.
Okay.
No big separation.
So what year were you born?
1915. It was a good year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
All the best.
Ein Kleinigkeit, as they say in French.
And in Chicago?
In Chicago, yeah. Michael Reese Hospital.
Okay. That's a Jewish hospital there, yeah? It still is.
Oh,
I
yeah,
suppose.
it was a great hospital, but it's been taken over by the national chain, so it's not the same anymore.
Yeah. Where were your parents born, and where did they grow
My
up?
father came from Lithuania, Kovno, and my mother came from Kharkov, which is the Ukraine now, but at that time it was Russia.
And when were they born? Do you know?
My father, well, both were born in 1892. So, and my mother lived, she lied about her age, I guess. We had her officially as 88 at her death, but probably closer to 95.
Wow.
But my father lived to be 84, and I'm almost 45 now.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What was it like for you growing up? What do you remember?
Well, we lived mainly in Chicago in non-Jewish neighborhoods. Once in a while, my father had a store in a Jewish neighborhood, but most of the time it was non-Jewish. So they were very anti-Semitic, and it meant I had to fight every day with kids and beat them up.
Where were they from? What kind of community was it?
Well, it was the western part of Chicago, Austin, which was next to the first suburb, Oak Park. And so they would call my mother in and say, your son beat up so-and-so. I said, he started it, so I had to defend myself. And this kept going all the time in all these non-Jewish neighborhoods. There were 3 Jewish kids in our area in Austin. And when we wanted to get the Hebrew lessons, they hired some Willamette to come. He had to take 3 streetcars to get to us, and he was a bearded fellow with the streimel and the long coat. And on the streetcars, they would tease him and make life miserable for him. So he came for 3 weeks and gave up on us. So we had to pick it up as the years went by ourselves.
So what kind of Jewish life did you have there?
Well,
Family.
there was very little Jewish life. And my mother had to take a streetcar to a kosher butcher to get the stuff, you know.
But you kept kosher?
Oh, sure. Didn't everybody in those days? Certainly.
Did you have an extended family there?
Oh, sure. In Chicago, my father had 4 sisters and a brother. And that's why he came to Chicago, because the sisters were already there with their husbands. They were older than he was. And then he worked to raise enough money to bring his mother and another sister and a brother over. This is what Jews did in those days. They brought their families over, and everybody helped these people get on their feet. And that's what they did.
So like your grandmother, could you speak to her?
Oh, sure.
So did she speak Yiddish, or
She spoke Yiddish and a little English. They always picked up English. And she lived to be 75 in Chicago. My grandfather had died over in Lithuania. And my mother's family, none of them came. So
you don't know anything
no,
about them?
no, I just have a picture of the whole thing. One of her brothers was a general in the Russian army in World War I. So,
did your family belong to a synagogue?
yeah, we belonged to Hamlin Avenue shul in Chicago. And I remember on Yom Kippur one day, I'm standing next to the son of the president of the shul, and he's standing next to his father. And it's an Orthodox shul, and they're all talking and praying like mad, you know. And in a lull, the kid says to his father, "Pa, Ma said when you get home at noon, there's good chicken in the icebox." Oy vey, you know, the president of the shul. Anyway.
So when you moved to Milwaukee, where did you move?
We moved to 25th and Hopkins.
Oh, so you lived like where the store was?
Yeah, sure. Didn't everybody? Either in back or upstairs. So.
And was that a Jewish neighborhood at the time?
No.
Was it?
No. There was another Jewish family, the Sesslers, a block away from us, and he had a fruit store. And during World War II, when the Nazis were rampant all over the place, his customers, German customers, used to come to the back door to buy the fruits and vegetables from Sessler. They didn't want to come through the front door because other Germans would turn them in.
Really?
That's how rough it was, yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I had a fight like mad, you know, with all these characters.
So were you a member of a synagogue here in Milwaukee?
Oh, sure. My father used to buy tickets, you know, like the Orthodox for the high holy days. And that was it. Anshe Shvard, the Litvische Shul, which is Beth Israel. And then later when I got married and so forth, then we belonged to Emmanuel. And now we're members of Shalom.
Were you happy? I mean, it was a difficult time to be Jewish. What were your
I
feelings?
was happy. I was beating them up. They weren't beating me up, so I was happy. And there's something about being Jewish, too, you know. You've got more talent than they have. I play a better fiddle than those characters.
Did you get any kind of Jewish education here? You had 3 weeks of the Malamed.
Nah, I got it all on my own. Read a lot of Jewish books through the years, 1,000 books or more.
Really?
And I had a library until recently of 10,000 books, being a newspaper editor and reporter. I'm down to 3,000 because my wife insists you got to get this stuff out of the house.
What'd you do with the others?
Well, I donated books to various groups, and I have 12 boxes now. And I told Avram Chudnow, he's building this retirement home, that, hey, I've got 12 boxes of books written by Jewish authors. You want to start a library? I've got them. So they'll probably pick them up.
Wow.
And then I'm a graduate of the Conservatory of Music when it was the Wisconsin College of Music. So I've given fiddles to them, and I've got 600 music books, which will probably go to them for their library, which is on the ground floor. So. And I gave 500 journalism books to Marquette, my alma mater, journalism,
Wow.
when I retired.
Well, let's go back and talk about your education.
Yeah.
So the Jewish education you did yourself from reading.
Yeah,
But so where'd you go to high school and? where you
I finished, well, I went to Crane Tech in Chicago, which was 95% Jewish. And now it's 100% black. In my last 3 semesters in high school, I finished at North Division here. And I played in the orchestra, and the conductor picked me of 3 of us to go to Des Moines for the National High School Orchestra. That was in 1931. And my buddy, we studied with the same teacher, quit school. He was the concertmaster. He quit school before he graduated. So I moved into his chair, and then after that, I tried to make a living in music. Graduated with a couple degrees from the College of Music. But you couldn't make a living in the 30s in Milwaukee. We had no symphony. The symphony died in 1934.
Oh, really?
It was called the Milwaukee Philharmonic. And one of the stars there was Ray Brown, Jewish violinist who was also a lawyer for Northwestern Mutual. And, well, the orchestra died in 34, so I went to Marquette. Second year, I got a job at the Sentinel and stayed for 45 years.
So what happened during World War II?
I was in the Army for 3 years.
And where does that fit into all of this?
I was editor of the Real McCoy at Camp McCoy
Oh, really?
after my basic training. But I had graduated from Marquette in 38.
Okay.
And I was writing sports for the Sentinel for 6 years, from 35 to 41.
How did you get into sports? You haven't talked about sports at all before.
Well,
Other than
I had played
boxing.
football
Okay.
on the Marquette freshman team, and I was just a natural in that, baseball and football. And in my sophomore year, I got a job at the Sentinel, so I stopped playing football, which was great. And my mother forbade me to play football. You know, Jewish mothers, they worry about their sons. Anyway, I graduated from Marquette, and I had graduated from the Wisconsin College of Music, so I had 2 fields, you know. But the journalism field was the great one. And I met thousands of people during my career, and it was great. I did all the jobs: reporter, copy editor, makeup editor, news editor. News editor for 18 years. That meant you laid out the paper, the general news pages. And it was great. I loved it. I worked nights 41 years. That kept our marriage intact. My kids
right,
never
so
saw me, you know,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it was great. No father to scold them or whatever, you know.
So is your wife from Milwaukee?
No, she's from Chicago also.
Okay.
And she was from an Orthodox family, very Orthodox. Her father used to found shuls, and when he didn't like the clientele, he would start a new one and so forth. So when we married, I had to convert. Most, you know.
And intermarriage.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, did you have any connection to Palestine and then to Israel?
Well, no, but But Ruth and I have gone to Israel 3 times. So, and you buy the usual bonds for the kids and so forth,
Uh-huh.
you know.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids and 2 outlaws.
Okay. And where are they?
They're all out of town. My son and his wife live in New York. They have an apartment in the city in Manhattan and a home in upstate New York. My youngest daughter works in New York. She used to have an apartment in New York, but she and her husband have a home in New Jersey, 40 minutes from Manhattan. And our older daughter, Judy, is in charge of a school program in Fort Lauderdale at the Jewish Center there, has been for 19 years. And she was here
Sure, I knew Judy.
14 years, you know, so that's where they are.
Any grandchildren?
No, that's the bad part. They're
That's
all
nice.
career people.
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Nothing.
Exactly.
Yep.
This is an interesting question. How do you see the present and future of the Milwaukee Jewish community?
Well, in all the years we've been here, you know, since 1929, it's always been about 25,000 Jews. It never grows larger except with the Russians, about 5,000 Russians are in here. But otherwise, it stays the same, so it'll probably stay the same forever. But the Jews here in Milwaukee have been a factor in developing the city and doing great things for it. And I've known a lot of the promoters and the guys who've done wonderful things for Milwaukee. It's great.
Is there any lesson in life that you have learned that has carried you through?
Take one day at a time. And that's what I'm doing now. The last 5 months I've been fighting bladder cancer. 11 years ago I had colon cancer. So you take a day at a time. The doctors came into my room recently at Columbia after my surgery, you know, and I was getting better. And one of them said, Leo, were you ready to meet your maker? And I said, look, I'm a Marquette graduate. I minored in Catholic philosophy. I'm ready anytime. Sure. So they had a wonderful time. We were kidding around. And they didn't charge. That was a nice thing. I entertained them.
There you go. What are you most proud of?
My kids, they're doing well. And I've done a pretty good job in my career, so. The Goyim elected me to the Media Hall of Fame. Marquette elected me to its Journalism Hall of Fame, the Byline Award.
Oh, wow.
I'm the only Jew at Marquette who got that award.
Were there many Jews at the Sentinel when you were working there?
I was the only Jew for a while, and then when I went in the Army, during World War II, they had to have manpower. So anybody who came got a job. So when I came back, there were about a dozen Jews. We had a minion.
There you go.
Yeah. Jews will conquer all, right?
There you go. Absolutely. Why not? Any regrets?
No, I'm happy. I had a wonderful life. Still have.
How many years have you been married?
63.
Wow. Is your wife healthy?
She's downstairs waiting for me. Then we're going to go out to eat, and then we're going to a session at Shalom with Rabbi Shapiro.
Oh, that's great. You are lucky.
I am, yeah.
It's really nice.
You got to thank the Lord for that. He's been good to us.
What was the happiest moment of your life?
Well, getting married, and then each child arriving was great too, you know. And then all the honors that you get through your years, they're good, but finding the right woman was great too.
You knew it right away?
I think so. I came home from work one night, and there were about 10 people around the kitchen table. And and she was one of them. And I knew pretty much then that, hey, it's a nice babe. So it's been nice, wonderful.
What would be the saddest moment?
Well, I don't think about it. I only think good things. And that keeps you going through the years, no matter what difficulties you have. Everything is not a bed of roses at work either, you know. We had some bestits as bosses at the Sentinel, and you dealt with it, and you overcame. That was great. And now we're the best of friends.
Really?
Some of these guys I was ready to kill, you know. Now we're buddies. In fact, they did a roast for me at the Sentinel alumni reunion. I was the subject of the roast, and the guy who fought with me all the time, he was the city editor and I was the news editor, and we fought for space and where the stories go and all that. And now we're buddies, and he ran the roast.
Oh, that's
So
great.
that
What was
was
the
his
main thing?
idea.
What was the main thing they got you about?
What do you mean?
Well, you know, they must have had good, you must have been good material for them.
Well, I knew how to handle the help. They came to me like a father. I was a father confessor, and they'd tell me their problems, and I would advise them. One guy, a sports writer, he was so mad at some printer who didn't work with him, you know. He just hated this guy. And he was ready to jump off the bridge into the river. And I said, don't do that. You'll be here long after he's gone. Just calm down and ignore him. And it worked out that way. And this guy just died about 5 months ago, at 90. So,
Wow.
so he took my advice.
Is there something about yourself that no one knows that's interesting?
I don't think so. I don't think there's anything interesting. You know, I'm just another Joe or Leo.
Or another?
You know,
How would you like to be remembered?
a guy who didn't make any enemies, just friends. That was good.
Wow. Tell me about your violining. When did you start playing? Was it a family thing? Did you
Well,
come from a family of musicians?
My mother came over on the boat from Russia, from the Ukraine. And on this boat was a violinist, very nice guy.
How old was your mother when she came?
17 or something. And so he wound up in Chicago, and she wound up married in Chicago. And when I was about 9, they decided, you know, a Jewish boy, there's Misha Elman and Yasha Heifetz and Ephraim Zimbalist, he's got to play the violin. So she remembered this Jack Hogan from Odessa and found him, and we started lessons. And he would take 3 streetcars to come to our home, way out in Austin. And he was very good, and I studied with him for 5 years, and he had studied with the teacher who taught Nathan Milstein and David Oistrach, great violinists. And then I came to Milwaukee and studied with the president of the College of Music.
Did your mom have to force you to practice, or did you just love it?
No, I practiced. In our apartment in Chicago, in the summers, I'd be playing in the morning, 2-3 hours. The Iceman would come to the various apartments, he'd hear me. Come back in the afternoon for the other apartments, I'd be playing again, 6-7 hours a day.
Really?
So last Sunday, for instance, I played for the inhabitants at High Point. We had, Shalom had Mitzvah Day, where we do things all over the town. And they asked me to play, and I hadn't touched the violin in 5 months during my surgery and all that. But I picked it up a couple times, and sure, I said, I'll do it. So I played for an hour, played Yiddish tunes for them. And this is the age bracket that knows that stuff. So we did it. And each night I've got the fiddle sitting next to a chair. I pick it up and play.
Do you like still learn new songs and stuff, or do you play?
I can play
like
new songs, whatever they want, you know.
So you can just play by ear? You just.
Well, I played 40 concertos in my career, and I would do 20 nursing homes, retirement homes, and so forth here. And in the winters, we'd be in Arizona for 19 winters, and I'd do 20 programs down there, play in their symphony and their chamber orchestra. So I did a lot of playing. I had calluses on my fingers, and my bottom too, sitting, you know. So.
Are any of your kids musicians or musical at all?
Yeah, my son plays the piano. He's chief drama and music critic for the New York Daily News.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And my older
So that's
daughter,
interesting because it combines both of what you do.
and my older daughter Judy has a glorious voice, and when she comes, we still, you know, get together. It's just a little girl I carried.
Yeah. Oh, wow, that's wonderful.
And the young one hates music because there was so much around the house. But she knows their stuff, though, you know.
Yeah. Does your wife do anything with music?
No, when she was
gets
a
to
little
listen
girl of 7, she started piano lessons. And her sister said, you're wasting your money to their folks. So they stopped it. But she serves the coffee and.
Yeah, and she gets to listen to every night. Were you involved in any, it says here that you were active in the Jewish Council.
Well, I served a couple terms on the Jewish Council, and I served on the Jewish Vocational Service Board. But how much can you serve, you know?
Yeah.
And they have a limit on the council, I guess, 2 terms. So, okay.
Is there anything else you want to tell us? My mother did this, and when she got home, she said to me, she's your age, she just says, I want to do it all over again. I thought of all these things. I should have told them instead of what I
No.
said.
I think if you got the essentials of what a person went through in their lives here, you get a picture of some of the Jewish activities, you know. I met hundreds of wonderful Jewish people as a reporter and editor, and there were some really great people in town. There was Al Silverman, who was a lawyer out of Chicago, and he came up after World War II. Vilter Corporation was folding, and they asked him to close out the place. Well, Al came up, and he not only did not close the place, he redid the place, and it was one of the most successful commercial air conditioning firms in the country.
Wow.
And when he retired several years ago, he turned it over to his employees, employee ownership. A great guy, and what a philanthropist. And he never wanted his name used, but he was helping people, you know. And there were others too, all over town, wonderful people. The clergy, there were some great guys. Rabbi Barron was great. Dudley Weinberg was great. Dudley had played the violin as a kid in St. Louis. And he used to come over the house and play with our string quartets. And if the women would be talking too much, he'd say, "Shut up!" And we'd go up to Door County for vacations in the summer. And they have this festival there for 2 weeks and 3 weekends. And the Weinbergs would be up there, we'd be up there, and I'd carry 2 violins in a double case, and Dudley and I would play, you know, and play duets. And all the Idlach, there were 6 or 7 couples, Jewish couples, and their kids, who who were in the cottages all around us. They'd be sitting on the lawn. And Dudley and I would be playing, then my wife would serve coffee and, you know. And it was great. And there were wonderful speakers who came to Milwaukee, Jewish speakers, Al Vorspan, for instance.
Yeah.
And there were other rabbis who were great. And I remember Dudley Weinberg, one time some rabbi came, he was a guest speaker, and he talked about sex. And Dudley was so upset by this guy, he said, I hope you'll come again and bring your slides. Nasty, you know. But Dudley was a great guy, and his widow, Marion, is very good. And then, of course, there was the Fine Arts Quartet, and Leonard Sorkin, who founded it, and George Sopkin. They were both kids in the Chicago Symphony. And Leonard told me that they were 18 years old. They were in the Chicago Symphony, and Dr. Frederick Stock was the conductor. And one time, Stock stopped the rehearsal and had these young kids. They had formed a string quartet, Fine Arts Quartet, had them perform for the rest of the members of the Chicago Symphony. And then the quartet came up here to UWM. Has been here all these years, you know. And I did a couple stories on Lynn, for instance. There was a famous nightclub in Chicago, Chez Paris. And so after a recital, Len and friends went to the Chez Paris to have a bite and so forth. And so after that, they left. And as they're driving home, he remembers he left his Stradivarius at the Chez Paris. So he goes back, the place is closed, and he pounds on the door, and there's a janitor working. And he says, I left my violin here. And the janitor says, and I suppose you'll say it was a Stradivarius, you know. Stuff like that. And,
He got it back.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Then he traded it for a Guarneri. And after he died, Aviva, his widow, turned it over to some dealer, and they were going for at least $500,000 at that time. And he had paid $10,000. So, a good bargain, you know.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess so.
Yeah.
Well, your newspaper career must have given you entree to meeting lots and lots
Oh,
of
yeah,
interesting
yeah.
people.
We met a lot of people. I gave Kathy a list of about 50 great Jews from Milwaukee, but there are hundreds of non-Jews that I was friendly with. The Zeidlers, Carl Zeidler, for instance, the first Zeidler mayor. My string trio when I was in college used to play at his church on 20th and Wisconsin, the Grand Avenue Congregational Church. And then Carl enlisted in the Navy and died at sea. His ship went down. Frank Zeidler, his brother, later became the mayor, and we've been very good friends. And Frank gave me a picture of Carl with his fiddle. And Johnny Doyne was the first county exec. And we were both Marquette grads, and we were friendly. And he was suffering with cancer at the end. And we used to winter in Sun City, Arizona. And so I knew that he was terminal, and his wife, Jackie, would keep me informed. So I set up an interview. We had an obit writer for the Sentinel. I set up an interview with the obit writer and Johnny at his Heartland home. And there was so much stuff there that the guy had to come back a second time. And then Johnny said to him, when is the story going to appear? And the guy says, well, it's up to the editors who handle these features. He said, well, when Johnny died, it started on page 1, a full page jump inside, and then another page on Johnny, which came out of this 2-time interview, you know. And there were others like that.
Who was your most interesting interview? could you say?
Well, I didn't interview
Anybody? Oh,
Johnny, but
No.
in the Army, I interviewed generals, and there was an order from some colonel one time, don't take any pictures of General so-and-so who's coming, the Army Ground Forces chief. So I told the photographer, I was editor of the paper there, I get behind a tree and shoot pictures of General, what's his name? And he did. And I ran a 5-column picture of this general on page 1, and I got a letter from the general, he would like copies of it. See, so
yeah,
what do the colonels know,
exactly.
you know?
Yeah,
And we had a wonderful deal. My captain was Jewish, Captain Cohan from Omaha, Nebraska, and I was just a sergeant. But I ran the paper, and he was chasing women on weekends, so I was in charge of the office, you know, doing the public relations and so forth. Second Division, Gesundheit. The Second Division was a division of Oklahoma and Texas guys, and they were in there, and I was attached to them for their maneuvers. And one time I'm with the generals, and somebody throws a grenade, and it gets close, and we're all on the bottom of a hole, you know, that had been dug, and we just barely escaped without being killed. But I wrote stories about the maneuvers, and Walter Winchell, who was a great on radio and so forth, said on his broadcast, Second Division is combat ready. Why aren't they out? So they were shipped out, and a new division came in, the 76th, which was from New York, New Jersey, 90% Jewish. So every Monday night, after the guys got back from out of town or whatever, we would meet in our PR office. The captain, myself, were the hosts. We had a huge Coke machine. And this is how we won the war, with 24 corned beef sandwiches from Detroit, one of the sergeants brought. I would stop, if I had a pass from Chicago, I'd stop in Milwaukee, and my folks would meet me at the station. My mother had a jar of chopped liver like this, and Miller rye breads. So that would be part of the thing. And so there would be like 30 guys in the office, and we'd have a wonderful time till 2, 3 in the morning. Then they got to get up at 5 in the morning for maneuvers and stuff like that. So it was fun. One time, one of these jars, I had a cap on it, and it was only half finished. And it was off under a desk to my right, and I'm in the center of the place. The captain's over there, I'm here. Our staff is out in the room. And this chopped liver is building up, and boom, it exploded, you know, just like one of these big, long Tom cannons. Really something. But we won the war, saved democracy, and here we are.
here we are.
Back at it again.
Yeah, we are.
Yep.
Wow.
But there were great experiences and great people in Milwaukee, too. Ali Edelman, for instance, played for Northwestern. And I just saw him the other day, Monday, on I Remember, on Channel 10. And he was telling about when he played for Northwestern against Marquette. Well, I was on the freshman team. Freshmen couldn't compete in varsity. But I was on the freshman team, and we were imitating Northwestern. And Ali was the quarterback for Northwestern. We imitated how they played, used their plays and so forth against the varsity. And Ali said they had a tough time, but they edged out a victory over Marquette. And one of the guys on the Marquette team was Marvin Bell, a Jewish kid, a nice Jewish kid from North Division High. Great. He was a coach in the high school system here. And I remember one scrimmage. I'm on the freshman team, and the head coach, Frank Murray, stops the play, and he says, Marv, what's the rule on that? Here is Marv, the Jewish end, who was a senior, I think. And the coach is asking Marv, a Yiddish cup, what is the rule on that?
Yeah.
So,
Were there many Jews at Marquette at that time?
no, very few. They had a quota in the med school, even though they won't admit it. But some of the best contributors to the med school were the Jewish doctors, you know, and lawyers and so forth. And I served on various alumni committees, and I would lecture there every so often. And for 6 years, I taught journalism in the mornings at UWM, and then go to work in the evening.
Oh, wow.
So, and I had some good Jewish kids in my class. Larry Tarnoff, who later became, well, he was a reporter for the Sentinel for many years, and then he became editor of the Jewish Chronicle. And Ken Lukoff, who was a brilliant kid, and the city editor and I sent letters and got him a fellowship to Hebrew University. And he came back one time and he's using my phone standing over and talking in Hebrew. And it sounded so beautiful.
Yeah.
And he became the head of NBC TV for the Middle East, this kid. And then he joined ABC, and he was heading a team to cover the El Salvador Civil War. They were flying from California, and they were going to stop in Mexico City and then go on to El Salvador. Well, the plane crashed on landing in Mexico City, no survivors. He was only 26.
Wow.
What a career he might have had, you know.
What do you think of the paper today?
I don't comment. The publisher asked me one time at a party, Leo, what do you think of our paper? I said, you really want to know? Pay me. And that's the last I heard from him. So, people keep telling me, though, that, hey, it was better when you were the editor, you know, so. And it was interesting, we were at a party at what was then the Schrader Hotel, now it's the Hilton Hotel. And my boss, Harry Sonneborn, was sitting next to me and his wife, Jackie, next to him. And we were at one of these round tables, and they had just come back from Israel on a trip to Israel with Professor Mansour from Madison. And I said to him, Harry, what was the outstanding thing in your trip to Israel? He says, I was at the wall, and I was watching these people put these little pieces of paper in the cracks in the wall and praying. And I thought, did my ancestors do that? And it turns out his father was Jewish, mother wasn't, and there were 4 boys in the family. And now he's retired out in California, you know. But the journal company for many years never had a Jew on its board. Had it known that Harry had a Jewish father, he wouldn't have been on the board.
Yeah.
But now there is Marty Kaiser, who's the editor, and there was the editor of the editorial page, who has left now, but he was Jewish too. So there are more Jews now in power. There was Stu Wilk, Herb Wilk's son, and he was a reporter for us. And he told the city editor at that time, you know what's wrong with this paper? What's wrong with this paper? And he said, there aren't enough Jews in top positions. Well, now Stu is executive editor of the Dallas Morning News.
Oh, really?
Quite a guy. I see his mother occasionally at High Point, uncle and so forth. So.
Well, it's something. Did you feel like, my recollection growing up was that the Journal was the main Milwaukee paper, the premier paper. And
Well, what happened was there were 4 papers really: the Journal, the Sentinel, the Wisconsin News, which was the Hearst evening paper, and the Milwaukee Leader, which was a socialist paper. And Victor Berger was the publisher and owner of the Leader, also Jewish, and he had a department store in town. And so the circulation of the Journal and the Sentinel were about the same. And then in 1939, on my birthday, they folded the Wisconsin News, the Hearst evening paper, figuring that they could get all that evening circulation into the Sentinel. As it turned out, the circulation went to the Journal, and that's when the spread came out, that the Journal became so big, and how they maintained that edge was they kept their ad rate only 2 cents higher than the Sentinel. So if you got 300,000 circulation and the Sentinel has 120, are you going to advertise in the Sentinel? And then previous to that, when they had the Wisconsin News, they had one advertising staff. So I would be in a furniture store and I'd listen to an ad salesman trying to sell an ad for the Wisconsin News. And if you bought an ad in the Wisconsin News, they gave you the ad in the Sentinel free. So now you don't have a Wisconsin News, and the ad that you used to give away free, you want to sell now? So it made it very difficult.
Yeah.
And then after I came back from the Army, Hearst had sent in a new crew, a new publisher, and a new managing editor. And the new managing editor was Jewish, Joe Packman, a Russian emigre. And he had no idea of how to handle people. So he made a lot of enemies, you know. And there was one time I used to lay out the paper with my page dummies, you know, and I would have to check with Joe. And there was a movie star who was arrested in a dope raid. Bob somebody, I forget, you know, so long ago. And so I showed him my layout, and he says, "Who the hell is this Bob?" You know, I said, "Joe, he's the leading male actor." Never heard of him. "I'll tell you what, though," he says, "I'll call my daughter Phyllis." Phyllis was 11 years old. "If she knows, you've got your ribbon," see. So he holds the phone, he says, "Phil, it's Dad." "Yeah." And he says, "Who is so-and-so?" He names this guy. And she says, "Oh, Dad, he's the #1 film actor." "Thanks, dear." Puts it down. "Okay, you got it," you know. We had things like that. And when I first came back, I was makeup editor, so I'm a half a block down in the composing room, and here is the boss. He takes a bulletin, and he's running this half a block to bring it to the composing room. You've got office boys to do that. And so one time there's a new copy editor sitting there, and this managing editor is running around. His shoes are not shined, his hair is not combed, and he's a disgrace to the Jewish nation, you know. And this guy says to me, "Who's that office boy over there?" "That's not the office boy." He says, "That's the managing editor." So we had a lot of characters.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah. The ad boss at the Sentinel was Ben Kay, Jewish. And he was very good, but what are you going to do if the Journal keeps its ad rate down? And the New York Times did that with the Herald Tribune in New York. Same way, keep your ad rate down. So you finally get rid of the competition. But there were so many great Jewish people, the Zuckers, for instance. Their father and mother were friends of ours, and Jim Abrams, great kid. And those kids went to school with our kids. And through the years, you know,
Did you live in Shorewood?
yeah, I still do.
Oh, do you?
50 years in the same house.
Wow, where is it?
On Beverly Road, between Murray and Oakland,
Okay.
on the south side of the street, the brick house. And we've had string quartets by the dozen playing in there, 2 at the same time, 1 upstairs, 1 downstairs. One time we had 1 in the basement. 3 string quartets going. We called it the String Quartet Bash, once a month. And then we'd all go out to eat, 20 of us. One time we wound up at Brothers 3 on the south side, and it was 95 degrees, no air conditioning. And they had a long table, the full length of the bar. And these gals, our gals, they thought they were going to some great place. They dressed up in long dresses and all that, and Izmir, when they got there, it was like a pigsty, you know.
Yeah.
So, we had fun.
Sounds like it.
Still do, you know.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. A good thing. Well, do you have anything else? Because
Oh, we could talk for hours,
I bet you could keep going.
but we
about it.
better not.
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been terrific.
You're very welcome.
Really enjoyed it. Really
Okay.
enjoyed it.